Maybe some of you saw a little bit ago in the New York Times, there was an interview with Senator Booker where he was asked who he admires, which writers he admires, and he said Ta-Nehisi Coates and Eddie Glaude, and he admires them because they take to heart James Baldwin's principle that to love a nation is to critique it relentlessly. As we celebrate the publication of Senator Booker's new book, United, I am so pleased, so honored that the Senator and Professor Glaude are here to discuss, and I trust, critique, the state of the United States today. I'm grateful, moreover, to Professor Alan Kruger from the Woodrow Wilson School, who has agreed to introduce our guests. Please give everybody a really warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm Alan Kruger. I'm a professor of economics at Princeton, and it's a real honor for me to introduce tonight's discussion, which, as you know, will be between Senator Cory Booker and my colleague Eddie Glaude. Senator Booker may not remember this, but the last time we were on a platform together, it was at Rutgers Newark at a meeting on providing more credit to small businesses in New Jersey. And the senator exhorted me to speak more passionately. He said, "Professor, you have some good ideas, but you need more passion." And I didn't have a chance to explain that I had the honor of working for a president whose motto was "no drama," which, quite frankly, has a lot to be said for it when it comes to making good decisions. Nonetheless, I will do my best to be passionate. This is a great book. I spent the weekend reading it. I came away inspired. It is a book filled with passion and compassion. And I thought I'd read just one paragraph to you to give you a sense. This is at the end of the chapter entitled Ms. Virginia Jones. Ms. Virginia Jones was the president of the Tenancy Association in the Brick Tower where Senator Booker lived. As I stood for Mrs. Jones, hope was relational. It didn't exist in the abstract. Hope confronts. It does not ignore pain, agony, or injustice. It is not a saccharine optimism that refuses to see, face, or grapple with the wretchedness of reality. You can't have hope without despair, because hope is a response. Hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. It's a beautifully written book. I know it's not easy to write a book. I heard on Freakonomics that every moment was a moment of love in writing the book. But I am grateful that you wrote it, for one. The book tells the story of Senator Booker's journey. And it's a remarkable journey. It's one which brings our nation together. You know Senator Booker's story, so I could be very brief. He moved into Newark, New Jersey after finishing Yale Law School to work there in community service, then served on the city council, then served 2 terms or 1.5 terms as mayor, then ran for senator and won in October 2013 and was reelected the following year. He is the first African-American senator from the state of New Jersey, only the 4th African-American senator elected since Reconstruction, and is the 2nd Rhodes Scholar to be a senator from the state of New Jersey. And I would dare to say that's just the beginning. Let me also say a few introductory remarks from my colleague Eddie Glaude. Professor Glaude graduated from Morehouse College in 1989. He earned a master's and a PhD in religion from Princeton University. He joined our faculty in 2002. He is the chair of the African American Studies Department and the William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American Studies. His latest book, which was published in January of this year, is titled Democracy in Black: How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Booker to make some introductory remarks, and then I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, I don't know if I should keep both microphones on or should I keep both on?
Yeah, one is just the live stream.
Oh, one, okay, got it. So, first of all, I apologize for getting out of Newark and not anticipating the kind of traffic that I would endure on the way here. Where are federal infrastructure dollars when I need them? But I am deeply touched by this crowd, and this is sort of the end of what has been about a month of a book tour, and it's been remarkable to me to go as far away as Seattle or the Castro Theater and have sort of sold out audiences, packed audiences, but to be home in your own community, in your own state, and see this room is full of people that I've worked with, that I've known for years. I see Linda in front of me, and just people that I respect and admire, and from going way back, do I have to call you Professor? Eric Gregory, who he and I knew each other when we were far slimmer, and your hair was not gray. I had hair. I know the county executive told me he was going to be here tonight, so I don't even want to begin to express to you what it means to me to be home and to be with you all here in spirit. And it means a lot, and I hope that we can get the conversation quickly to spirit. But I do want to say something about the two people. I only plan to speak about one, but there's another who's in the room now that it's making me nervous, which is something I used to have. My biggest fear as a kid was, as a young man, was speaking in front of crowds, and I thought I had gotten over that until I stand up here right now, and Cornel West is sitting to my left. So Dr. West was like this guy I didn't know, but I read so much of his works in my early 20s. I think I could recite to you entire chapters from books like Race Matters. And he was such a formative figure in my development, not even ever meeting him, that when I did meet him, I definitely had a fanboy moment. And then I met him, and he, during a very difficult time of my life, when I was serving as mayor, which was probably one of the more challenging times. I'll never forget Dr. Howard, Pastor Howard, who is a legendary pastor, just recently retired from Bethany Baptist Church in Newark. He knew I was struggling when I first became mayor. In fact, one of my favorite stories to tell about Pastor Howard is I was arrogant enough to think that I would be elected mayor of Newark and crime would just stop. And I was taking every assault, every murder very personally in the city. And one night I was just feeling such grief, and I got up to go run. And just as I got up to go run, about feeling this grief about the loss of life in my city, I get another murder notification, and I just lose it. And I go for this hour run plus, where I was just weeping and running. It was just this emotional, cathartic thing. And I come back home, and I just call Pastor Howard. I didn't know who to call. And I just I'm probably blubbering, half just calling for a lifeline, because I felt such just pain. And he listens to me for a while, and then he says, this is the advice he gives me, which I have not followed yet. But he says to me, Cory, you need to listen to me. And I go, okay. He goes, no, you need to listen to me. And I go, I'm listening to you. And I'm thinking he's about to tell me that we need to call a citywide meeting or some kind of summit. And this is what he says. He goes, Cory, you need to get married. And then he starts counseling me about, like, dude, you need to come home, not like I do still to this day, to like chemistry experiments in my refrigerator, but he's like, you need to come home and have somebody that's gonna like keep your feet on the ground, man, because you're taking yourself too seriously. And then what he did, I think, as an antidote to the long wait for my beshert, for my better half, he invites me to a table with Eddie and Dr. West and a few other men that became, especially my early days as mayor, a once-a-month counseling session for all of us. But I learned so much at that table from getting a chance to sit next to these titans, and I got to know Dr. West really, really well. That passage that was read about hope, I can still remember when Eddie and Dr. West sat me down and gave me this long lecture about the difference between optimism and hope that so spoke to me at a time where I was struggling in my life with the wretchedness of existence. And he is truly one of the lights in my life, and I'm so grateful to you being here tonight. It means a lot. You were just in my bedroom on 60 Minutes and everything. So real quickly, so this is Eddie's book. And if you have not bought Eddie's book, I'm sorry, Dr. Glaude's book. I was reading this thing while I was writing my book and calling him up or texting him. Actually, those long messages I would send him after each chapter, I would text it. And he calls folk out in this book. I just want you to know that on page 151, I am mentioned. And it's not nice, people. but I had to say, I thought of this thing. I said, wait a minute. I'm reading this book, and my muse happens to be Muhammad Ali, because he just keeps punching me in the gut, but in the most profound way. This is a guy who is in many ways you might think he's my peer. We're about the same age. We both suffer from what my father used to say, boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot.
Exactly.
But I just want you to know that he has been a gift to me, not only at the table that I got to sit to get to know him, where I first met him, but he is relentless in calling people in power to task. And he is relentless in speaking truth to power. And even with people who are his brother, and I feel a brother-like relationship with him, he is unforgiving in his pursuit of justice. And not a justice that the kind of words we sling around, especially during campaign time. We talk about freedom and justice and the American way and all of that. His justice is deeper and more textured and nuanced and more thorough than I think that often is used when people use that word of justice. And for me, the best thing I can say to him is that I still learn from him every time we encounter each other. Wow. And in that sense, I don't care what kind of degrees, how many letters, but he is, for my life, a professor of my life. So I'm grateful to him being here right now. And so, just so you know, that makes this different than any other gathering like this I have had. From the one I did in Newark to I did one at Rutgers. I've gone around the country, done them, and I'm going to do one tomorrow night in Montclair. But this one I'm going to be on my toes on because I've got two of the best critiques of African Americans in office. Cornel West might have said one or two things about President Obama over the years. Maybe, I don't know. So this puts me in a position where I know tonight we're going to get into it. But I want to just say something, then I'll sit down. I just want to tell a story, and then I'll sit down, because there is this anguish that I wrestle with about having this faith in our nation that is so deep, and a love of country that is so deep that I feel an anguish at the work that's yet done in our nation. And I want to confess to you that there's been times where I have been so angry at myself and at us that I've twisted in the wind. It is those grief moments, like when I call Pastor Howard, that have been sort of a persistent reality in my life since I left the town of Harrington Park. Harrington Park is in one of our northeasternmost towns in Bergen County, and my parents raised me in this town after fighting a large sort of legal process to move into that town. Literally, after getting a promotion from Washington, D.C. to the New York area, my parents had to get the Fair Housing Council involved and have white couple pose as them as they went around shopping for houses, because they would be told the house was sold all the time, and the white couple would come behind them and find out the house was still for sale. And after the white couple put a bid on a house for my parents, and on the day of the closing, my father showed up instead of the white couple and a lawyer, and then there was a physical confrontation even, where the lawyer, the real estate agent punched my dad's lawyer and sicked the dog on my father. But I moved into the town, as my father affectionately called us, the 4 raisins in a tub of sweet vanilla ice cream, and grew up in this incredibly nurturing community with a tremendous gift, to the point when I was 18 years old, my father just was pressing on me to understand the privilege that I had, as my father would say, when I was 18 years old. And there's no teenager that you all know that had more teenage swagger or has more teenage swagger than I did, because at 18 years old, I was high school All-American football player on my way to a scholarship. Unlike Eddie, I got into Stanford because of a 4.0, 1600. I got into Stanford 4.0, 1600, 4.0 yards per carry, 1,600 receiving yards is how I got into college. Eddie got in a different way. I still think, athletic acumen beats intellectual any day, sir.
Any day.
So look at what we value in society. How much does an NFL player get compared to a Princeton professor? I don't know. We have a longer career. Yes, traumatic brain injury, is that an issue for you or no? A couple conversations with Cornel West, I felt like I had traumatic brain injury. But my father really wanted me to understand the privilege and talk to me in a direct way. He would say humorous things like, "Boy, don't walk around this house like you hit a triple. You were born on third base." And the reality is, I was, because my parents made it clear what got me to where I was. My dad was born in Jim Crow South. He was born in the mountains of North Carolina. I now know, thanks to Henry Louis Gates, who traced my history back, I now know the succession of poverty from which my father came, going back before slavery, single women giving birth to children, and then that continuing until my dad, who was born poor, and if he heard this right now, he would heckle me from the back and say, "Don't tell those people in Princeton I was poor. How dare you? Tell them the truth. I was just Po, P-O. I couldn't afford the other 2 letters. I was just a po boy." And my dad was a comedian. He got by on his quick wit and his gift of gab, and yet he had a tough childhood. He grew up with a stigma of not knowing who his father was. His mom couldn't take care of him. His grandmother raised him for a period, and then she couldn't take care of him. And my dad would just tell the stories of the people who, through remarkable acts of kindness, would do for him to help change his destiny and bend his trajectory of his life in a different direction. And my father would just tell me I could never thank those people, but the only way to really honor them is to do like they did and never forget how powerful living life with that kind of daily generosity of spirit. I often say now that the biggest thing I believe that anybody can do is often, in any day, is often a small act of kindness, decency, and love. Which brings me to the issue of, trying to get this to stop feeding back, but which brings me to the issue of the story of failure, and then I'm going to sit down and let Eddie jump in. But so I moved onto Martin Luther King Boulevard in Newark when I was still in my 20s, really searching for a community in struggle, and wanted to find a neighborhood. I'd worked everywhere from East Harlem to East Palo Alto, but I wanted to be in the thick of it, and I wanted to be a lawyer that fought for the rights of those who didn't have access to the law. As Brian Stevenson so aptly says, as was true back then as isn't true now, we live in a country where you're treated better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. And so I wanted to be a crusading attorney, and I moved onto this street with a healthy self-regard to make a difference. And I moved on. I often joke about trying to follow the gospel of a great philosopher. If some of you who've gone to rarefied institutions may have studied this philosopher, I'm sure that Dr. West and Dr. Glaude teach this philosopher. His name is Chris Rock, and he has this joke. You can call it bad if you want. That why is it the most violent street in every city is often named for the man that stood for nonviolence. And I moved on to Martin Luther King Boulevard, which, by the way, in the mid-1990s had incredible testimonies to Newark's greatness. It had institutions like St. Benedict's or County College, Rutgers, where Paul Robeson attended, just incredible. But the south end of that street was in really, really rough shape. And I started getting involved and met, there's an old definition of faith that when you come to the end of all the light you know and you're about to step into the darkness, that faith is knowing one of two things will happen. And either you'll find solid ground underneath you, or the universe will send you people who will teach you how to fly. And I was very fortunate because I entered this very difficult environment with too healthy of a self-regard, and immediately started getting my comeuppance as I was moving my stuff into my. I rented a room in a boarding house. As I was coming back to the car, my stuff was stolen. I witnessed a drug dealing. Now that I've gone back and actually tracked down a lot of the guys who were dealing drugs in front of my building, it was dangerous. It was scary. One of the guys named Jace, who I interview in this book, who actually I was shocked because he was so forthcoming with what he had done. I said to him, well, we're not going to use your name. And he says, you're going to use my name. And I'm like, okay, we will use your name. But he's an extraordinary guy who confesses to me that he had to intervene to get them not to shoot me in my early days. But he said, don't worry, Cory, it was just a warning shot. We were just going to shoot you in the leg. But it was a tense, very difficult place. And I found incredible people, African-American women, all of them, who basically adopted me. Even when I didn't think they adopted me in the beginning, the chapter that was written from Miss Virginia Jones, she seemed to have no desire to have me around at all. She was gruff and difficult. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm Cory Booker, I'm from Yale. Did I tell you I'm from Yale? Just sort of full of myself, and she just barely had anything to do with me. And it took me a while of very difficult interactions to even get her to start letting me sit with her. And it took a long time, but eventually she started giving me tasks, menial tasks, carry these boxes, put up these flyers. But eventually, after the course of about a year, we were strong partners together, and eventually took on the slumlord who soon thereafter got convicted in federal court for his crimes. It was a long journey. And even going back and interviewing, Miss Jones is now passed, interviewing people. I moved into these projects, lived there for about 8 years. And it was just a powerful experience writing this book because I didn't want to take any stories for granted. I wanted to make sure that, how family stories can get exaggerated over the years. I wanted to make sure I had second and third sources. And so I went back to interview people who knew Miss Jones. And it was just powerful to me because I kept encountering people that lived like my father encountered. In fact, Miss Wright, who I interviewed about Miss Jones, another one of the tenant leaders, says, well, you may have thought that she didn't like you, but please understand, after you first came and saw her, she turned to the rest of us after you left and said, that's my son. And so this is the kind of love that I experienced. I've never lived in harder living. These two buildings were decaying because slumlords had deferred capital maintenance. They were infested by vermin, roaches. My apartment, I had 8 years of battling mice and roaches. Heat and hot water was intermittent. And this is tough for a 20-something and 30-something during the times I lived there, but there were elderly folks living there, there were children living there. Where the elevators didn't work, we would go through the hallways, and often the hallways would have people using drugs in them, people passed out in them, people using them as bathrooms. It was just a very difficult 8 years, but the power of this community was something that while it was the most physically difficult place I'd ever lived, it was such an inspiring community to be a part of. Folks every single day who were getting up and they were fighting. People with choices to live elsewhere. Miss Jones's Miss Jones's son in 1980 had been murdered in the lobby of the building in which I lived, and yet she never left, and she could have left. She worked for the prosecutor's office, but she just never gave up. And so the confessional I sort of make in one of the more difficult chapters, I write there, and this is the sort of way I'd like to frame as Eddie and I begin to talk, because this is a moment of brokenness. And I found as I started writing this book that the best things to talk about in the book were either moments when I was getting my comeuppance or moments where I was broken by this country, by circumstances within our nation. And so I moved into the buildings in 1998. I ran for mayor 4 years later and lost in this mayor's race. And it's a suggestion I have for everybody. If you're going to have a spectacular failure in your life, have a documentary team there to capture it, because it's for those of you who haven't seen the movie, it's a very good cathartic thing to have your spectacular losses captured. But I basically lose the mayor's race and then have that gulf between two mayor's races where I go back to this nonprofit sort of grassroots organizing and empowerment group and do a lot of those things in the 4 years. But I'm a part of this community, and the challenge for us in the community was that they were low-income housing, but then after I lost the mayor's race, the slumlord gets convicted, and then the housing authority moves to take over the buildings, which actually meant that the landlord of the building de facto was the guy who I just lost to, and the management of the buildings was just horrific, and things got even worse in the buildings. But during this time, during my 8 years, I'm watching kids grow up. And there was a group of young boys that used to hang out in my lobby, and I tell you, they were my light. These young guys, I would come home and they would just hang out in the lobby, whether it was like 5 minutes or half an hour, talking to them and like. And then I started coming home and just seeing change. These young boys were young men. Graffiti was spreading in the lobby, some gang tags, and I started smelling stuff I hadn't smelt as much, as intensely as since I was at Stanford. And
Well done, Cory. Well done.
This is the truth. But there's a real big difference between flaunting drug laws like you do on college campuses and everywhere in the community. Every day, 1 in 10 Americans is breaking a drug law. But there's a big difference between breaking drug laws at Stanford and breaking drug laws in Newark. You all know the data, I'm sure. This drug war, which has not been a war on drugs, has been a war on people. And it's not just been a war on some people, it's been a war on poor people, it's been a war on brown people, and it's been a war on the most fragile in our communities, the mentally ill and the addicted. And so I knew point blank that my friends who never had to worry about being stopped and frisked on the way home from a dorm, that never had their dorms raided, that literally could make jokes about breaking the law, that for a young black kid, it's a world of difference. And that these young boys, all they needed was one charge, because what we do in America to someone with a drug charge for doing exactly what the last 2 presidents admitted to doing, the consequences for a poor person are dramatic, because you cannot get a job, you cannot get many business licenses, you can't get Pell Grants, you can't get food stamps, you can't get public housing, you can't vote, you can't serve on a jury. In fact, all this talk about the Shelby decision and its rolling back of the voting rights, I passionately talk about those issues. But the biggest disenfranchisement going on in America right now that has exploded since 1980, is the disenfranchisement of nonviolent drug offenders. And I always say nonviolent. Let's just say the disenfranchisement of people who've been to prison, period. And it's so bad remember, if you're an African-American boy versus a non-black, there's a white boy or Latino boy. If you're Latino in America and you violate drug laws, you're about twice as likely to be caught and arrested for it than somebody white. And there's no difference between races in America for using drugs or even dealing drugs. In fact, young white men have a little bit higher rates of dealing drugs than young black men. But unfortunately, if you're Latino, twice as likely to be arrested. If you're black, almost 4 times more likely. So surprise, surprise, about 4 times, African Americans are about 4 times more likely to lose their voting rights. And now it's gotten so bad, we're here in election season, that in our swing states like Florida and Virginia, 1 out of every 5 black people has lost their right to vote to felony disenfranchisement. So this is the biggest rollback of voting rights we've seen in this country since we were battling in the 1960s to affirm them. So I basically saw these young men and alarms went off in my head. And so I just started spending a little bit more time in the lobby than asking them. I thought maybe if we go out and do things social, if I can bring some friends of mine, because it's one thing to sit down and for a guy like me who's never drank alcohol, never done a drug, and from the suburbs to talk to them about the world that they're in versus me bringing in friends of mine who have done drugs, who have dealt drugs and had horrible stories or enlightening stories. So I want to try to get them to go out with me and meet up some of my friends. So first I offered to take them to the movies, which they jumped at. I said, name the movie. I thought they wanted to go see a home improvement movie when they said they were going to wanted to see Saw. But then I took them to see the movies, and I took them out to diner, and then that's when I started trying to create these mentoring relationships. But this is where the confessional starts. Is things were going good for a while. Guys like my friends of mine, like Oscar James, is an incredible young brother who has testimony to tell, but then suddenly I got busy. We're all busy, right? And I got busy. And this was my big busy because I am running for mayor of the city of Newark. It's now 2006. And I think to myself that, you know what? These kids every night, they're right in front of me as I come home, but I'm going to be mayor. I'm going to get that brass ring, and I'm going to be able to help all the kids. And I sort of made my conscience feel better. And just dove into the campaign 1,000%. And the irony of this story is that I would come home and they would minister to me. These fellas would be like, hey man, we got your back, we're gonna get everybody to vote for you. They would see how tired I was and they would lift me up. One night that I remember the best was when I came home one night and they had stolen all these lawn signs and they were holding these lawn signs up. And I'm walking through like it's a parade, and they're chanting my dreams, saying, Mayor Booker, Mayor Booker. I was lifted. I don't know if the elevator was working or not that night, but I tell you, I lifted that broken mechanism up to the 16th floor until I started wondering, wait a minute, where did they get those lawn signs exactly? So I'm elected, and I'm now mayor-elect of the city, and I immediately get warned, the police immediately get warned by the FBI that I have death threats on my life. And so they surround me with police. And they station police in Brick Towers, which was like the safest they'd been in a long time. But everybody here, when you were a teenager, you're not gonna hang out where there are cops hanging out. And so I didn't see the kids. But I'm not thinking that. I'm now the man. I'm the mayor of the city. I've got big things to do. I'm gonna change the world. And I'm running around like harder than I've ever run. When I get sworn in, I take off. In fact, I forced them to do a swearing in, not usually during the ceremonies at noon. We did a secret swearing in at 11:59. I stood there so I could be mayor right away and take control of the mechanisms of the city because we were gonna start making changes right away. And I was going like in an unhealthy fashion, burning the candle, not at both ends, but with a blowtorch. And I would show up every time I could. If I heard a shooting on my BlackBerry, I would go to the scene and I would do street corner ministry, telling people this is not who we are. We're better than this. I would talk about drug courts and reentry programs and putting more cops on the streets, just telling everybody what I thought we were going to do together to drive down crime. And I'll never forget, days into my time as mayor, first month or so, there's a shooting on Court Street in Newark, and I go there, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, there was a body covered, another one being put into an ambulance, and I barely affirmed the humanity of the body on the street. I got the report from the police, and I turned around because it was right in front of a senior citizen building, and I just started ministering to the living. Well, that night I get home, and I'm sitting there about to steal a couple hours of sleep when I'm going through my BlackBerry, and I'm getting the reports, and there's the police report about the murder, and I look at the name, and it's Hassan Washington, the young man who was so much like my dad from the lobby of my building. Who lived 4 floors below me with his grandma. This guy was so much like my dad. God had put him right in front of me. And it was really one of those breaking points in my life where I'll never forget, and I start the chapter talking about the funeral where, for me, it was, for anybody from Newark, you know Perry's Funeral Home, which became a place, and this is a great family doing a great business in our community, and they give back in so many ways, but I used to hate going there. And there was one room that was in the basement. I suspect it's often, maybe if you can't afford, that's maybe the basement, the room they put you in, I'm not sure, but I used to hate going into that basement because the stairs were narrow and rickety, and I always felt like I was descending into the bowel of a ship. And there I go down that day, and there's just folks, the room is packed, people piled in on top of each other, chained to each other with grief. There was moaning and groaning, all for another American reality that is too damn common, a boy in a box. And I stood in the back, and now I'm there. This is what I dreamed of, but I don't feel like I'm powerful. I feel weak and impotent. I feel shame and guilt. And all I could do was stand in the back of that room. I wasn't mayoral. I wasn't shaking hands. People were coming over to me, hugging me, and I was doing everything I could to lean on their light, but I felt nothing but being choked by darkness. And I remember just finally breaking, and I told my security detail, I gotta go. And I said, we're out of here. And I left abruptly, stormed up the stairs, jumped into this nice, fine looking SUV that the city had issued me, and I drive to City Hall. I run into City Hall. I don't even want to take the elevator because it'll force me to look someone in the eye. And I sprint up the steps into my new palatial mayoral office, and I slam the door, and I sit on that couch, and I just, for the first time, started crying in my office as mayor. And all I could think about was that all of us were there for this young man's death, but where were we for his life? And here I was, trying to stay true to my legacy, and I was not my father's son. I did not show honor and respect to those people who took my dad in when he was in crisis, who put a roof over his head, those people who put money in a collection plate so he could afford tuition for school, those people who scrubbed floors for him and worked for him. And I say all this to say that it was a moment of powerful breaking for me. And it's a moment that even when I was doing this chapter and I finally tracked down Hassan's father, which is a whole nother story, I was getting choked up talking to him, and I found myself, here I was, a United States Senator, looking for his forgiveness. He was in jail for pretty much all of Hassan's life, but still looking to him for forgiveness for not honoring his son and where God had put him in front of me. And so I close and sit down and let Eddie tear me up. But I want to just say this. We are all so much more connected to each other than we understand. And if anything, this book, a lot of times I get introduced to by radio shows by people who haven't read the book that think this is somehow a commentary on our federal government. I have learned, there's a great Judge Learned Hand who once said, our documents, they mean nothing if the spirit of the people don't make true the words. And in fact, interpret the words, because remember, our founding documents were written at a time, if you read them, Native Americans are referred to as savages. Women seem like they don't even exist in the document. Stokely Carmichael used to always say, constitute. I can only say 3/5 of the word. That joke's got to creep up on you there for. But the truth that I'm trying to exalt in this book, which I hope Eddie and I speak to, is what I believe has been us at our best and us at our worst. And that the persistent challenges of this country, there's no presidential candidate. I'm sorry, I know there's people probably here that are fans of a number of them, but there's no presidential candidate who's going to ride in and solve the challenges we have. There has to be a expansion of our moral imagination of who we are, followed by a courageousness of action that we've seen in so many points in our history for us to begin to be who I know we are already. And so with that, I'm gonna surrender the microphone and sit down next to my friend And how do I do this?
You hang on to that.
I hang on to
He has
that. Oh, he does. And by the way, that's scary, man. You just like, it's like the professor's got notes. And I'm in no hurry, so if people just start leaving, we can just sit here and be like old times and talk. I don't have any place to go. I've got an empty apartment at home.
Well, we want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions, because we want to give hold up, I'm not on.
Use this one for now. I'll figure out that one.
Got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
We ready? Are we, test 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, there we go.
All right.
So we want to give people an opportunity to ask you questions.
Okay, so how you do? I tried to call you on the way down here. You just don't answer your
I tried to
phone.
text
Were you
you.
screening my call?
No, you weren't texting. Yeah, down here you can't get any reception.
Okay. Does Dr. West have does he still have like a flip phone?
No, he has an iPhone.
He's got an iPhone?
He has an iPhone.
No way.
Yes, he does.
Is he on Snapchat? I'd like to follow him. Dr. West has an iPhone. That should have been front page news.
Yeah, it should. So Cory, let's talk about this. I mean, the beauty of this experience is that we wrote these books together in so many ways.
Take this for now.
Okay. The beauty of this experience is that we wrote these books together in so many ways. I was getting texts from Cory at 3 o'clock in the morning after he would read a chapter, and I would actually wake up, right? I think the lavaliers are causing the feedback.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm trying to work with it. We're trying to play.
Okay.
I think closer is better.
Closer.
Yeah. Closer. You're good now. You're good now.
So I would receive these texts at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I started anticipating the text, so I couldn't sleep. So I wanted to ask you this question. The book is, you've talked about this already, and so I want you don't have to go into detail. But the book is purposefully populated with a whole lot of people. Miss Virginia Jones, Ray Chambers, Frank Hutchins, Natasha, Hassan, Wasim, your mom and dad. Talk about this in relation to this dialectic in the book between responsibility and connectedness. You make a lot of this, so talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think that the values that get vaunted in our society is this self-reliance and rugged individualism and personal responsibility, which I don't think there's a person in this room that didn't hear those messages and get them necessarily in your family, but I think we do ourselves a disservice if we think that is the exultant end-all and be-all, because even our founders had this understanding that, to me, is embodied in that African saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. They say at the end of the Declaration of Independence, which we talk about, personal responsibility, that's all about independence, but at the end of it, they almost surrender when they say, but in order to do all this, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And so that's an idea that I don't think we exalt enough. It's almost a supplication we have to the divinity in each other. This surrender to the idea that we need each other, knowing that our history speaks to this. Rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. It didn't map the human genome. It didn't overcome Jim Crow. If I look at the testimony and the achievements that we have, even people who say, oh, this person's a great innovator, the technology in the smartphone that I'm holding, or in my pocket rather, that Cornel West has, that is innovation built upon innovation, built upon innovation, built upon innovation. So you may be the inventor of Instagram, and people may herald you as this individual entrepreneur, and a lot of that may be deserved for your innovation, your discipline, and the like. But please don't know that you are part of this larger group of effort. And so I think what you're getting at in your question, and you could tell me I'm not answering your question, but I think that there's this tension between individual responsibility and collective responsibility that we have lost too much. And this idea of sacred honor is definitely not something we're seeing in this primary season right now in terms of some of the candidates, but I'm talking about that at our level, this understanding that we need each other, that we are each other's hope, that there's no moving forward alone in this country. And I think that we forget that. And the next step in that I think is even harder is this idea of privilege in this country, which we have a lot of, but privilege often ends up being, unfortunately, this idea that if a problem is not affecting me personally, then it's not really a problem that should motivate me in any way. As opposed to folk realizing that part of my obligations to us all is to seek out injustice. Most people don't understand that, and I hear this all, my parents admonished me when I pledge allegiance to the flag, think about what you're doing. In their minds, I was swearing an oath for liberty and justice for all, which means that I need to be an active agent and committed to that. And so the final thing, I think that I really struggle with this, because I do think that this is where we are selling ourselves short as a society, is that somehow we've started to herald in America as if the great aspiration for this country is that we be a nation of tolerance. And to me, that's a truncated, inadequate aspiration. Tolerance is a 4, and it means, and if you think about it, if I'm just tolerating you, I'm stomaching your right to be different. And if you disappear from the face of the earth, I'm no better or worse off. That ultimately, this idea of that collective responsibility I think you're talking about, Dr. Cloud, is that love is really what we should be aiming for. And love is difficult, it is risky, it hurts, but love says more than I'm just stomaching your right to be different. Love actually says, I need you. I recognize not just your worth and dignity, but even deeper than that, I recognize that there's a need here, there's a relationship that if you are taken care of, if you are empowered, I am empowered. And so I worry that we are creating a society of tolerance in America, or that's our aspirations, and that is deeply inhibiting our ability to achieve greatness as a society.
So that's fascinating at a certain level of abstraction.
Okay, I'm afraid.
Now, how does that translate in terms of how we conceive of government and politics? So there's a wonderful way in which you're talking about what we should feel towards one another, a sense of community, a sense of connection, right? But how does this translate in terms of policy? So there's this moment in the text, there are these really amazing moments in this book, and you have to get it, right? Where Cory is really self-critical. On page 110 and other pages where you kind of look into the mirror and say, look, I was preoccupied with X. It's not just simply the Hassan story, it's in other moments, right? But there's this other moment where you said you relied too heavily on philanthropy as a way to respond to some of the structural realities in Newark. So what follows in terms of your conception of politics and your conception of what's the responsibility of government from the view you just laid out?
So I struggle with this a lot, and these kind of conversations help me with my struggle. But I just feel we have that first and foremost, this idea as a government is something abstract and separate and apart from who we are, is very problematic to me. And I hear people talk about the government with a dashes of cynicism, and I think cynicism is a toxic spiritual state. I think it is debilitating. I often call it a refuge for cowards. Not to have the courage to recognize that government is me, and I'm part of this, and I am responsible for this, and there's no problem in criticizing it. But if you are criticizing without any constructive action, not behind changing your government or improving your government, then there's a problem. So to get to the harder part of what you're saying, though, look, I was driven crazy as mayor and I talked about this today at a conference on opioid abuse, how we are spending so much money in this country on the back ends of problems, grievous amounts of treasure, and failing to be enlightened in aggressive investment in each other. And other nations are learning from America's past and investing in ways that we never did. Investing in ways that we are not. Like take infrastructure, for example. We inherited from our grandparents the greatest infrastructure on the globe. We now are ranked, depending on which international indice you look at it, between 10 and 20 in the quality of our infrastructure. We've thrashed it, I think led by ideals about government that are perverse.
Right.
And as a result of that, our economy is being hurt. We're all wasting money. New Jerseyans spend between $1,000 and $2,000 extra every year because of our inadequate infrastructure. But the same goes with people. Other countries are realizing that they need to invest in their children as early as possible. And by the way, China spends 4 times their GDP of what we spend on infrastructure, Europe twice. But investing in children is something where we used to be great at it, but now other countries are doing things we're not. From investments like universal preschool to even paid family leave, which every country has, every so-called industrial country has, the Congo, Afghanistan, but we seem to want to put millions and millions of our parents in this terrible position where if you have a sick child or a child in the hospital, you have to decide between getting that paycheck and paying the rent or being present when your child's vulnerable. So I can go on and on examples of what I think has become this perversion to the point where I've had conversations with some of my Republican colleagues. I remember I set out to go down there not to be the Democratic senator, but to be a senator that can deliver things, get things done. And therefore, this is a divided body. I've got to partner with people across the aisle. And so I remember sitting with one of my Republican colleagues. I was asking them out to dinner, to come to their office, anything I could do to spend time one-on-one or small groups with Republican colleagues. And I'm sitting with one and just said, sort of just trying not to get upset, but just saying, wait a minute, I can show you all the data that a nurse-family partnership, what is that? That's for women with at-risk pregnancies. I saw this in Newark. If you send a person home, a nurse to regularly visit that mother, you will, for every government dollar you invest in doing that, you will save 5 government dollars. And by the way, the kind of government dollars we shouldn't want to spend. You save dollars in visits to the emergency room, because those are cut down. You save dollars in interactions with the police. But even more than that, rates of abuse and neglect go down, success in school. So here's something that if we were running this even just in a pragmatic way, like, wouldn't it be right to invest in the people? And so what I'm saying to you is I just get frustrated that the government that my government that I'm a part of, that we have established in our countries, is not representing this understanding of the most valuable natural resource in this country. Is not oil, gas, coal. It's each other. It's us. It's our children.
So, I was setting you up. So this gets us to this love of the country. And we've been having this argument over
A long time
about American
I
exceptionalism.
read your book, I read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, and it's just like boom, boom, punch.
Right, but this American exceptionalist,
Yes.
this American exceptionalist narrative.
Yes, we're now letting you in on a conversation that we've had a lot of times, and I'm not sure if I have the intellectual firepower to stand up, but here we go. Go ahead.
No, but this is really about the argument in the book, right? Because there's a sense in which there's a faith, an abiding faith in the country's capacity to live up to its ideals. And then we get this sort of description that when you put the facts before folks, when it comes to a robust conception of the public good, there is a set of there's hesitancy, if outright, just rejection of the idea, often predicated upon on the assumption that we're taking stuff from hard earning, stuff that people work hard for to give it to people who are lazy and undeserving. And there's a moment in your book, page 62.
Okay.
This was an example of something I admired about my dad, his ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in his head and somehow more often than not find balance. On one hand, he raised me to believe in the goodness of the world, to trust that the bargain so celebrated in America was fair, that hard work will be rewarded, that the decency you put into the world will be reflected, that you reap what you sow. But he also came of age at a time when this bargain wasn't always honored. he knew that to some degree my experience of the world, kinder than his, was a lie. My father, a man who worked his way up from poverty, who lived his own Horatio Alger story, still knew about the lie. Despite the fact that he could be pointed to as living testimony to the fairness of the bargain, he was haunted by the lies. And then you go on and so there's a sense in which this faith is always running up against, and you mentioned this in your opening, against the reality that calls it into question. So from whence the faith, Senator Booker? And then underneath that, what are you afraid of?
So I'm trying to understand the last part, because the first part of the question is pointed and I'm going to deal with that. But go a little deeper into the second part of the question.
See, there's this, what are you afraid of in confronting that perhaps we have built the country true?
Right. And
That what we're seeing are reflections of a set of commitments that have defined the country at its core. And that they're momentary exceptions like you and me and Dr. West and some other folks. But Newark isn't an accident.
so,
Camden isn't an accident.
well, that gets me to the first part of your question,
Yeah.
which is most people don't want to call it like it is.
Right, tell the truth.
That and I talk about this in the book, that like just take Newark for example, that this is the result of consciously bigoted policies.
Right.
That when I say this is the poverty, this is
Housing.
the housing,
Right.
that these were conscious policies not that long ago, okay, in our lifetime. And we had them in New Jersey. New Jersey is the 5th most segregated state in the country for African Americans, 4th most for Latinos. And we have to admit that that's not an accident. That's not just because certain folk want to live together. It's a result of policies, from redlining, FHA policies, loans. I could go through a whole ream of them. Even things that we herald in this country, like the GI Bill, which I hear talked about all the time. I had to say this in the Senate once to some folks who just kept going on and on about how great the GI Bill was. But it had a racially disparate impact that came about because of conscious racism amongst individuals. And so all these pathways to the middle class have often been denied to people based upon race in this country. And then in New Jersey, and other states, you sometimes have not only restrictive covenants in towns, but towns breaking off from their cities. I saw this in Atlanta recently.
Hudson City Savings was just taken to task by the Department of Justice. Right?
Yeah. So you have a lot of this stuff still going on. So I'm not one of those folks that is ever going to be caught spinning a tale. And I think this is a mistake we make in our society when we want to sanitize American history for the comfort and convenience of those people growing up. One of my favorite Cornel West terms to use around January, that usually, not always, but usually I give him credit for it, is the Santa Clausification of Martin Luther King.
Right.
That we sort of sanitize this man until he seems broadly acceptable, but don't talk about how he worked hard to call to task the injustices. The March on Washington, which people want to say was just about race and racial equality, was actually, if you look at the list of demands they had, I think there were more of them about economic equality than it was about necessarily racial equality. In the end, he was calling for a poor people's march. In the end, he was attacking the Vietnam War. And so what I and this is where we might diverge, and I always try to defend myself with The Fire Next Time. If you're up against the wall and being beaten up by an intellectual like Eddie, you grasp for somebody like Baldwin, and you can usually defend yourself.
He quotes Baldwin on page 211, by the way.
So Baldwin got criticized for the end of The Fire Next Time because he wrote a truthful, painful, difficult book, and then he had 2 pages some people criticize him for being Pollyannish. And so I like to, and I hope your book was a hard read for me. I'm hoping that my reader who reads this book, it's difficult. I hope it's inspiring, but I also hope that I didn't pull punches,
No, right.
and that I told the truth, and especially shine the light on myself and tried to be very much upfront with my failings. But at the end of this book, Baldwin says, then he turns to the people, the folks, his readers, and say, we now have to solve this. And he goes, in fact, you quoted this in Race Matters. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing now because I don't have the capacious minds of the two gentlemen on my left and the right, but he says, I know what I'm asking you is impossible, but in today's day and age, the impossible is the least we can demand. This is the part that's very important to me. And one is, after all, emboldened by the spectacle of human history, and Negro history in particular,
Right.
for it is nothing less than a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. And so my reading of American history, my unadulterated, like I don't want to mess with it. When I sat around the table with my parents, they told personal stories, still even working through the executive ranks of IBM, of the ugliness, the wretchedness, the failures, but yet somehow they always emerged with a hopefulness and a love of country that infected me to believe that, yes, my country is a story of many things, including vicious. I mean, after Reconstruction, I mean, this is not the first time America was dealing with terrorism. What was going on is most people don't really know the depth of the outright terrorism that was going on, the destruction of black communities. And so I don't want to in any way candy coat that, but where I come out is that the greatness of my country, which is unique in some ways in terms of its diversity, and having people heralded from all over the countries, that all over the world, is that somehow, as different as we are, the greatness of our country is the overcoming, and we have a lot more work to do, but the overcoming of these injustices.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna have to argue about that, but not now, because I want to. The book is full of death, Cory.
We're scaring people from this book.
No. The book is amazing. Look at the title. Look at the picture. Right? He's handsome and everything. Yes. How is it possible?
This is the difference between an intellectual and a politician. This is his book. I don't see his face anywhere. Show mine again. Boom!
But what because I know I want to get you guys to ask questions. But one of the things that I was struck by, and you remember when I was reading the book, I was so struck by the presence of death. There's an extraordinary moment, and Cory, as you can tell, he's so good with language to paint a picture. There's the moment with Wasin, right? And this is almost, I think, is this the first encounter?
Yeah, it's only encounter.
It's your only encounter, right? And he's dead.
Yes.
And it's a hard conversation you have with your father. Could you? Because there's not only Wasin, there's Hassan, obviously. There's Miss Jones. You tell the story of the death of Virginia Jones, and Frank Hutchins. He loses his sight. I see you. Hey, Frank, it's Cory. I see you. Going to the movies, you're there. In IHOP.
Yeah.
And then, of course, your dad, right before while you're on the campaign trail. Talk about the importance of not only talking about the people who lift you up, but mortality in this book.
So let me just, I'm going to try to, from death, I guess it was Resurrection Sunday yesterday. So I'm going to try to get a little biblical here.
Go ahead.
But I'm going to use Neil deGrasse Tyson to do it. So one of my favorite realizations in going back and interviewing people from the book was I have this chapter where I start off jokingly saying I hate Henry Louis Gates.
Right.
And because he partnered me in this book with, he has this TV show Finding Your Roots, and he partners me he first pumps me all up, saying I'm doing a show. It's called Finding Your Roots. I know about your show. I thought he was asking me to come to like a screening or something. He goes, no, I want you to be on the show. And I'm like, me, Skip? And he just sort of stroking my ego. Of course, you're an up and coming. You gotta do that. And I'm like, yeah, tell me more about how great I am. And then he says, and then I say, well, who are you going to partner me with? And I thought it was going to be another peer of mine, somebody I could relate to, and so on and so forth. And then he just like says it, and like it's almost like he dropped the mic and walked away. He says, I'm going to partner you with John Lewis. And John Lewis, as everybody here knows, it's like partnering Superman with Jimmy Olsen here. And so the joke I make in the book is that the show starts with bios of both people. And so the bio of John Lewis is, John Lewis, hero of the civil rights movement, standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Alabama state troopers, billy clubs, tear gas. He literally bled the southern soil red for freedom. And then for my biography, just as dramatic, Cory Booker, riding his big wheel in suburban New Jersey. He takes a turn too hard. He falls off, skins his knee, bleeds the northern soil red. So I thought this chapter, I started to write this chapter because I found out interesting things. Skip like shocked me. He actually came to me and said, you hit the lottery. It's very hard for many African Americans to trace their history back beyond 1870. It's been wiped out, no records kept. It's very hard. But he pierced the veil and found out a lot about my story, and he identified actual slaves. He identified slave owners that I'm descendant from. He identified that I had Native American blood, but also that I was direct descendant of Alabama militia man who fought in the Creek Wars to remove Native Americans. It was this amazing sort of history all wrapped up in my blood that then he found, amazingly, my mom's dad died without knowing who his father was. My grandfather was very light-skinned, especially compared to his siblings. Stories were that it was a white doctor impregnated his mother when she was a teenager. Mm-hmm. And so he goes back and swabs cheeks of people, white families in Louisiana, finds the direct match, my mom's first cousin. They share a grandfather, and informs them that, hey, you have a black branch of your family with this dude in Jersey who's the mayor of Newark. And so I thought I was going to sort of tell that story and then also tell the story of my family's moving into Harrington Park. But then I got sort of surprised because I went, in order to check the story of moving into Harrington Park, I've heard that story for so long, and every time my dad would tell the story about the fight in the real estate agent's office and the the dog would get bigger every time. And soon it was a pack of wolves that attacked, and my dad single-handedly beat them off. So I had to go do some fact checking, and so I tracked down the head of the Fair Housing Council from the 1960s, who turns out to still be the head of the Fair Housing Council now. She turns 90 years old, a woman named Lee Porter, and it's yes, I literally. I did what I try to do to Cornel West, but he gets lower quicker than I do. I'm bowing in front of this woman on my knees to thank her, and I say, I need to find the group of lawyers who represented my family. And she says, well, Marty Friedman was the guy that took a punch in order to get in, this Jewish lawyer who she revered, she told me stories about. But she said the original lawyer that I gave their case file to was a guy named Arthur Lessman. And so this is all discovery at this chapter, and it took the chapter in a different direction. Because I call Arthur up, and long and short of it is, he's 84, retired, I think, fully, and I say to him who I am. He's like, I know who you are. And I basically want to know why he at the beginning of his career, when he's busy, and he's barely making it, they're doing like closings and like things like that, why did he represent my family? And what he says to me is, he goes, Cory, it was a Monday, and I was confused on how he even knew it was a Monday, but he said it was a Monday that he came to work and said, we need to go to Alabama, because he had just watched on TV on Sunday a bunch of marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so this idea of death to me, and again, this is maybe my spirituality, but this idea of death to me does not, I always say, my father died, who died 6 days before I was elected to the United States Senate. I said over and over again during that time of grief and pain that death ends a life, but it does not end a love. And that is physically true, is spiritually true. And if you think about this, I don't know the names of those marchers. I can maybe name 3 or 4 people that were on that bridge. But the courage of these young folks standing up on that bridge instantaneously changed the minds of 2 people in New Jersey, spanning space and time in an instant. Those 2 people in New Jersey then decide to immediately go representing African American families, dozens and dozens of them, that then change the lives of kids yet unborn. So I am a living manifestation of love from people who are long gone.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this is where Neil deGrasse Tyson comes in, where he says that the stars, if we go out tonight, and I don't know if it's a cloudy night or not, and we look up in the air, we will see in the sky stars that are millions and millions of light years away, and some of those stars actually are dead and gone. But the energy they gave off, the light, the warmth, it goes on in perpetuity. We see them as if they're still there because that light is still traveling. And so I understand that death may seem like a finality to people, but if we are infusing our lives with courageous love, and I'm not talking about change the world stuff, because when we start thinking about that, we allow our inability to do everything to undermine our determination to do something. And in every moment we have that choice to accept things as they are or take responsibility for changing them. And that choice may sometimes be something as small as the kid that's in front of you. You know, one of my favorite compliments Cornel West gave me was really the first time we really met each other. Bill Bradley sent him into Newark during my 2002 campaign, and we spent the whole day, and as he's leaving, he says something to me that I'll never forget. It was like having your hero say something to me. He says, "I love the way that you affirm the humanity of anybody that you walk past." And it was a great compliment to me because that's something I admired in my father, that he would always stop and he would tell me that you don't even know the power of a word to someone or a small thing. And he would say to me, I'm a representative of that. I'm a kid that could have so easily gone a different way if it wasn't for other folk reaching out to me. So I just say in conclusion, like, I know there's a lot of death in this, but I hope the lesson isn't just tragedy and sadness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hope it really is, you know, as Frank, who is one of my favorite chapters to write in the book.
It's beautiful too.
And it's just, I hope it's an uplifting death,
No,
because he died in a way that his last words to me were so powerful. He was a guy that saw the humanity, and in this funny way, in the first tenant meeting I sat with him, when I was impatient because the meeting kept going on and on and on. Everybody's getting to the microphone having a speech to give, and I'm there, a young lawyer, trying to get this data, and at some point I'm like, I look at him like just to roll my eyes and somebody's going off, and he looks at me with this Zen-like look and like, what are you talking about? See that person, listen to that person. This is an important moment, and I explain that more in this chapter. So I just want you to know that we are all lights, but we choose in our lives, unfortunately, not to turn up the brightness as much as we can, and we miss opportunities to change the world. And I'll end with Alice Walker, who said the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place.
Wow. So this is our senator. So we want to open it up for questions, and I want you to know that in this book, Senator Booker talks about mass incarceration. He talks about environmental justice. He actually moves towards policy at the very end of the book that's tied to this extraordinary vision. But I wanted to end my portion of this with this. On page 80, he relays a prayer that he gave at Tent City in Garden Spires after a campaign. And he says, Lord, I prayed, help this group invoke strength, grace, love, the limitless potential that comes from unity. And though we will leave this place and go our separate ways, help us to remember this connection. Help us to remember this strength. Help us to remember the love we witnessed here and the power that flowed forth. Lord, help us, though we will soon be separated by distance, to remain always united in purpose. Senator Booker.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. So, thank you. Thank you very much. I just saw the county executive back there. County executive. Okay, he's talking, that's okay. I saw my grade school teacher in the back who could ruin my political career.
Can I just say just a quick word on logistics? We have about 15 minutes for Q&A in order to leave a little bit of time for you to sign some books. If you have a question, can you please line up by the back counter? And if you're standing there and don't have a question, can you make some space so that we can get a few questions in?
Yeah, and I'm willing to stay late and sign books, so please don't think I will stay here till midnight if I have to. Yes, of course.
So we're going to give it about a few minutes for people who have to be alone.
So, okay, here we go. If Eric Gregory can stop talking back there. Professor Gregory, I know you're a professor now, but shh.
Yeah, I know some people have to leave, and that's fine. Just please do it quietly so we can start with the question.
And why did Professor Glaude just disappear? What if I want to? Yes, sir.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for coming to speak today.
And what's your name?
My name's Andrew Hanna.
And are you in graduate school?
I'm an undergraduate. I'm a senior at Princeton University in the Department of Near Eastern Studies.
In the Department of what studies?
Near Eastern Studies.
Okay, Near Eastern Studies.
Yeah. So I grew up in New Jersey. I'm from Somerset County, and I was lucky enough to grow up in a suburban town called Watchung, which is really beautiful, well-off
Are you
town.
trying to sell your senator on the beauty of Watchung,
No.
sir? Because I know Watchung. It's one of my favorite towns to say.
Okay.
Watchung, baby. Wasn't there a song?
I'm not sure.
No.
But I was also lucky enough to have friends of mine who lived in Elizabeth and Newark, sister cities. And it's about 20 to 30 minutes, and I was lucky enough to actually go spend time there when I was younger and just see the difference between where I grew up and where some of my friends were living. And you've talked a lot today about connectedness, and you said it's amazing how connected we all are to one another. But in my experience, I've often seen, just living in New Jersey, going through different school systems, that there's a lot of disconnectedness between people, especially you talked about racial segregation. I've seen that, or economic disparity between people who live in urban centers or places where I grew up. And what I want to ask you is, what kind of challenges did you face as a local official, and what were you impeding efforts at creating that connectedness with one another, and what can you do, what will you do in your position as a United States Senator to encourage that kind of connectedness nationally, so that we can actually understand the positions that people and the circumstances people are living in from vastly different backgrounds, lifestyles, socioeconomic class, etc.
So I've never at any of my events ever read from my book, but I wanted to, Eddie started it, so blame him. But I want to make one point about, we are connected whether we realize it or not. And the problem is when we insult those connections, really bad stuff happens. And that's, I write that at the beginning of this chapter where I say profound connections exist between us all. Interdependency so manifest that perceived separation is a delusion. Like a great pool connecting millions of drops of water, introduce a stone and all are elevated. Poison apart and all are affected. You cannot connect more or less. The connection exists no matter what our perception. But ignore the connection, deny it, and consequences come. Yet still we too often obscure the truth of our interconnection. We insult our bonds with indifference. And through self-inflicted blindness to connection, we curse the whole and damn ourselves. And I'll tell you, this is I write later chapters about the outrageousness of the criminal justice system, where we think we're not connected. And when we have this mass incarceration of poor folks and brown folks in America, that somehow that doesn't hurt us. Well, if you want to think that there's no connection between the billions of dollars New Jersey taxpayers pay to support a system where the rights of so many are taken for, we have more nonviolent drug offenders in prison today than all the people in prison in 1975. And we're paying for that. During 1990-ish and 2006, we were building a new prison in the United States every 12 days. And so right now, if you think that that's not hurting all of us in New Jersey, it really is. And so what I try to do in this book is wake people up to the urgency that this is not just about charity or enlightenedness or, oh, let's help those people living there, that this is about helping ourselves. One of the things I always say is that there's genius equally distributed around this country. There's many geniuses being born in Watchung as there are being born in Patterson. But the problem is we're bereft. We lose out on the genius because we're wasting that incredible resource. So you sound like, just by your very question, that you were oriented towards this understanding. And what you are, another thing I say all the time is that I believe our nation needs more poets, because somehow we've got to wake up this country in the way poetry often does, the way poets do. As I said before, expanding that moral imagination, calling to the consciousness of our country. And look, I'm no great artist, but I like to think that we all have artistry in us, and that part of our calling is to wake up other folks to what's going on around us. And so I'm just hoping that, based upon that very question, that you understand that nothing will change in America unless I do or we do. That I hope that you are somebody that wakes people up to the power of our bonds. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Senator.
Hi.
Hello. My question for you are, what are your thoughts right now on the lead water crisis going on in Newark, and who should be held accountable with 17,000 kids now having to be tested for lead poisoning?
So this is one of the things that frustrates me about this moment in our history, where everybody's suddenly waking up to what is not an anomaly. There is not a lead crisis just in Newark. There is a lead crisis in America. There are 500,000 people, children, many of them, are being diagnosed with lead poisoning every year. Now remember, lead poisoning rates, which is sort of a bad number because it's changed over the years as doctors recognize that any lead really, it's gotten easier to be poisoned with less amounts. But lead poisoning in this country is a dramatically commonplace existence. And so my frustration is that Newark is not an anomaly right now. As you all know, many people here know, Camden has been delivering water to their schools for years now. And if we were testing it, if we were being fair, by the way, we're finding out a lot of this because it's public schools. But there's a lot of lead poisoning in our water that likely is going on in commercial establishments and some of the aged housing that we have, but we're not testing for it. And so Newark, when I was mayor, we were very conscious of, in fact, when I was a city council person, we had like epidemic lead rates because a lot of it still is coming from lead paint in older buildings. So the idea of responsibility is what frustrates me with that question. So many people want to look for who's to blame is often the question, but who is responsible is we all are responsible. And why is there no sense of urgency about the toxicity of our country? One of the proudest things I'm involved in right now, which I hope, Congressman Pallone is involved in this, but it's sort of picking up where Lautenberg left off and just changing our toxic chemical laws. We are in a country right now with the carpet right here, the chemical companies, it's almost like innocent until proven guilty with chemicals. They can put out these chemicals and we don't even know if they're poisoning us or not. Let me give you another outrage that's going on in our country, especially for us in New Jersey, which is we used to have a mechanism, a payment process with a small tax on polluting industries to clean up Superfund sites. Well, that has sunset, and people don't realize this, that since that sunset, the number of our Superfund sites in America is growing. And so these are orphan sites, many of them, where you can't even find the company anymore that's responsible for cleaning up. Now, why am I so agitated about that? Is because a lot of the data, including data coming out of Princeton, is now showing that children being born within 3 miles of a Superfund site have about 20% greater rates of autism and birth defects. Now, so happens that these Superfund sites are more often in poor communities. And in America, about 10% people live within 3 miles of a Superfund site. But if you think New Jersey is okay or falls in that category, you're wrong. We have the most Superfund sites of any state, and half of our population lives within 3 miles of a Superfund site. And so, of course, being a mayor, where my kids, I think we've got more than one Superfund site in Newark. I get one of the first early pieces of legislation I introduced is to reauthorize that funding mechanism, which Reagan signed and Mitch McConnell voted on. But in this environment, as Eddie was sort of getting to, where government's role should be discussed, people aren't, I can't get one Republican co-sponsor for that legislation. So I want to have a conversation, elevated conversation in our country that's not about reactiveness to this week it's Flint, next week it's Newark's school water. Trust me, when I stood in our caucus and we discussed this, Senator from West Virginia, Senator from Pennsylvania are all standing up talking about the elevated blood levels rivaling Flint in some of their towns and communities. This is a national problem. And this is where I get frustrated. I know this can get me in trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway. If we had an attack on one of our schools by a terrorist tomorrow, God forbid, because by the way, it is so easy for someone to go out and buy a semi-automatic weapons like the attacks in Mumbai and what have you. So we can get into that. But trust me, the response from government would be spending a lot of money. We have spent billions. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but we have spent billions and billions of dollars, okay, on this idea that we want to protect ourselves from terrorist attacks. Now, I was looking at the numbers the other day, and we've had more people die of Planned Parenthood shootings, the Charleston church shooting. We've got extremism in this country in a lot of ways, but I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, and I'm going to defend those dollars coming to our communities to defend our children. But why is the response to a terrorist attack flow resources, coordinate agencies? I can tell you all that we're doing. But right now, our children are under attack because of the toxicity in our country, the poisoning of our children, and you can barely get a news article about it. And so this is not going to change. This is not going to change unless we don't just castigate the issue. This is why I'm so happy the sister's holding her smartphone, is because we don't realize, like, you know, James Bevel, Dorothea Cotton, what they talk about poets, they had to get King. One of my favorite chapters in Parting the Water is about King and his lieutenants. These young people had to challenge King to change his strategy and allow young people to march in what was called in that chapter, I think, the Children's Miracle. Now those folks were great. I had 1,000 people in that small church marching against Bull Connor. And what I'm seeing, Eddie turned me on to some people I followed after that dinner in Newark, from the Black Lives Matter movement, to follow their Twitter feeds and things like that. Some really provocative stuff, is that a good word? But these are young poets, right? I would call them young poets. And so we all are young poets. I don't care what age you are. And if you have more than 10 followers on Twitter or Facebook and you're not posting about these things, informing your circles, I've seen social science data. I'm up for election in 2020. It's not a campaign commercial. But I could put up a whole bunch of commercials, and none of those things are as powerful. I could none of those things are as powerful as persuading people as your peer telling you, hey, you should vote for this person, this woman, this man, or so on. We have so much more powerful over the people in our networks, but we don't use that power. So here I just told you about a crisis most people don't realize that's going on right now that is imminently threatening New Jersey's children. From Superfund sites, brownfields, toxic chemicals, lead in our water, lead paint. I can go on about the toxicity of our state, but we are not manifesting the urgency to change it, nor educating each other with a call to action. All right. What does your shirt say, sir? I cannot read it.
Oh, it says Bowdoin College, but it's my sister's.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a freshman in high school, and So you talked a lot about,
You're a freshman in high school?
yeah.
You have a maturity on you, sir, that is more akin to a junior or senior in high school, I must say.
So you
And
talked-
one just gratuitous piece of advice, can I give you a gratuitous about life success?
Sure.
Okay? And I may offend Dr. West, but I really do believe one of the secrets to getting ahead is to shave your head. I think it cuts. You notice how I move a lot quicker than Cornell West because he's got all that wind resistance up there. I am streamlined, man. I move like a shark. Okay? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So you've spoken a lot today about how it's really important that we love our fellow man and we look for ways to better their lives and to not just tolerate them, but to really try to realize that we're all in this together. But then you juxtapose that with the current political climate and the fact that it can be difficult to watch debates on both sides of the aisle because people seem to sincerely believe, or at least they say, that the people in the other party don't have good motivations, and they don't love our country, they don't want to see our children better, they don't want to see our country safer, and they truly hate this country. So what are some concrete ways that you see now, and whether it's legislation or just things that you're doing to try to bridge that divide and make people kind of realize that we have the same goals, we just have competing ways of getting there?
So I don't think I'm going to give you the answer that you're looking for because I don't have the solution to the kind of vitriol I'm hearing, and there's no false equivalency here, please understand, because I know just being in the Senate with my colleagues that my Republican colleagues seem a lot more afraid of the sentiments that's often being put out there, like the Donald Trumps and the like, than Democrats are. And what I mean by that is, I'm saying that as a precursor to saying that I see intolerance spewed by people on both sides of the aisle, and I still believe that we have. You can see the current climate of the presidential candidates. I'm so happy to see a more civil dialogue going between two very important. I think it's a very important national conversation being had in the Democratic Party. But at the same time, I am one of these. I'm social media addicted senators. I think I might be the only one. And I sometimes see people who I agree with on their sentiment, but why is it laced with such viciousness or you can make your point, I think, so much more powerful. And that's why I respond to haters on Twitter all the time. And I try to do it so everybody can see it. I respond with lots of love. I tell people I love you. And I say, may you and I both, if they say the most gnarly, mean things about me, I try to respond with love. But I want to be honest with you. Nothing I'm doing is changing what you're seeing on TV. And so I just want to say, maybe the best thing I can summon someone far more eloquent than me is something that Dr. King said that I think about all the time. Because I do think about, the first, you'll see in the book, the last thing I do before I get sworn in and go to Harry Reid and get sworn in is my mom takes me to go see John Lewis. And it's really important to her and important to me because for reasons that are obvious, but then what struck me when I sat with him was how ridiculously humble he was. I mean, he wouldn't let me get up. I mean, he's like coming over and me, serving me, grits and eggs. This is before I was a vegan. Commercial. And so his humility is what struck me, and I've gotten to know him better. And I say that to evoke King now because I don't know. I think I've had some tough fights, and I can tell you stories till the morning sun comes up, but I think I've had tough fights. It's nothing like the folks who were sitting at lunch counters and having people beat on them and not respond. It's nothing like the people who boarded buses knowing they would be bombed. It's nothing like standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge with folks storming at you. And so King once said this very eloquently. He said, and before I get to the quote, one more point I want to make is that, because you're important to me, young man, is that I don't think that they were seeking, when they were seeking voting rights, economic rights, I don't think they had in their mind that I'm going to convince that Billy Club wielding Alabama State Trooper to love me. I don't think that they thought that that was a goal they could accomplish right now. But they were marching and fighting otherwise. And this is what King said. He said, what we will have to repent for in this day and age is not simply the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so, the point I finish with is I can't change. By the way, when I say I love you to folks on Twitter who throw hate at me, 1 out of 10, the person immediately disarms, and sometimes I get an I love you back. So I do know that the spirit with which you greet people can actually change hearts, but I just want to tell you right now, don't worry about them. I would be more worried about when I was in high school, and I was one of these high school kids. I was so unconscious to the horrible experiences my gay and lesbian brothers and sisters were having in my high school. And I was a part of the problem. I was so unconscious in my early days in college to the sexual assault going on all around me. I'm a good-natured person, but I was so unconscious to it. And I was part of the problem. And so what I'm telling you right now is, if you focus on those folks with their mouths are dripping with words of interposition and nullification, as one of the King's great writings was talking about, then you're given a lot of that energy. What I would love to see you do is focus your energy on the good people who are just silent, as King talks about often in the letters in the Birmingham jail. All right?
Good evening. Thank you, Senator, for your time. My name is Asa Craig. I'm a graduate public policy student here.
So you were not a freshman in high school?
I'm not a freshman in high school. And he took my question, though.
You're a graduate student?
I am a graduate student.
In where are you?
Domestic public policy at the Woodrow Wilson School.
Okay. And is there an area within the domestic public policy you focus on, sir?
So I come from education policy. I was working at the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. And,
oh, wow. I love them. That's great. That's
yes.
great. That's where Eddie gave me the dig about relying on philanthropy. We got to talk to him, even though I do admit that there was a mistake in some ways.
Yes, and so my question is really what I'm interested in is policy advocacy, and you spoke a little bit about cynicism and sort of we should not have a cynicism for Congress, and sort of as a young gentleman just said, it just seems like there's a no on immigration, a no on issues such as a Supreme Court justice. What is it? What drove us to this point from your perspective? And then how do you think that we can sort of de-drive back to a point where we can get to more collaboration besides humanity?
This is what I say, and love you for where your focus is. But this is where I sort of start pacing because, one, because I'm trying to get more steps on my Fitbit, and two, I'm just trying to be honest here, Eddie. But two, gets me pacing, gets me agitated because, like, if you look at the history of legislation that was that we now herald and think was easy, but like voting rights and civil rights legislation failed so often. It still burns me in the Senate that the longest filibuster was Strom Thurmond against the civil rights legislation. It was hard to get that done. I remember people telling me, oh, the background check bill, was after Newtown, and we tried to get the background check. It failed by like 1 or 2 votes. Oh, it's so terrible. We failed. We didn't fail. That was one attempt. And our history is replete with people who would never see the kind of justice that they were seeking, but they never let it undermine their determination. The labor rights that I take for granted, that we all do, it took generations of fighting to expand those freedoms and those rights in this country. And so I understand that this may seem hard, but the cynicism is what's working against us, not the people in the other party. And I'm going to give you this funny example, but I'm going to tell you the truth here. I had a great moment in 2008 in November because I went to go vote in Newark, and with Barack Obama on the ballot, it was an exciting day for me. And I go, and then I'm stunned, literally, because there's a line wrapped around my polling station. I had never seen it before. And I go up there, and I'm so excited, so happy, but I know how genteel y'all are in Princeton and how you treat your elected officials. In Newark, we just keep it real. So I go up on the end of the line, and the woman on the end of the line doesn't say, "Hey, Mayor, great to see you." She looks at me and she goes, "Don't you think you're cutting in this line now?" That's my greeting. I don't care who you are. You ain't special. You're gonna wait just like the rest. And I'm the mayor. I got a cop next to me. I look at her and I go, "Yes, ma'am." And so I waited this long line. It took me over an hour to vote. And then 1 year later, it is November of 2009, and it's a gubernatorial election. And I go to vote, and nobody is there. Okay? And everybody here in New Jersey, I used to have to inform people in other states when I tell the story, but we know what happened. And so then this is what I don't have to name names. Y'all know what happened. But let me tell you what happened to me, though. Let me tell you, I'm now the mayor of the city in the midst of your chapter on, what is it, the Black Depression? The Great Black Depression? I want to like rip it out of my book and like pass it around, make everybody read that. Because I'm the mayor of the largest city in the state, 85% Black and Latino, people of all backgrounds, from Portuguese, and we are going through a depression in Newark. And it is painful what I'm seeing every single day. And cities all over the state of New Jersey are desperate. And now a new governor gets in and cuts a lot of money. So what does Trenton do? Lays off a third of their police department. I could go through all the towns, including mine. But that's not where it ends. People start coming up to me and saying, not only are you laying off police, but they come up and saying, Planned Parenthood is being closed because what happened? Money got cut to Planned Parenthood. People start coming up to me and saying, we had all these no pledges of no raising taxes, but guess who got taxes raised in New Jersey? Because the earned income tax credit was cut, which has taxes now on the poorest New Jerseyans working poor being raised. What's the number one reason in our state kids miss school? What's number one medical reason? Asthma. And what do? People coming up to me and saying, oh, we're pulling out of regional greenhouse gas agreements? All of this stuff, I could go on more and more, and people are coming to me and saying, why are the Republicans doing this to us? Now let me tell you something. 2009, there was nobody at the polls. I looked at some of the numbers. If there was 75% of the turnout the year before, you wouldn't have seen the kind of police layoffs. You wouldn't have seen cuts in their income tax credit. You wouldn't have seen Planned Parenthood closing their doors. You wouldn't have seen pulling out of the So I know for a fact, when I'm in Ohio, I know there's more Democratic voters than Republican voters, yet they send more Republican Congress people. I can go through state by state the things I see that is not the result of big bad people that we want to vilify. It's the result of good folk who are not engaged, not doing something. Now, by the way, it's so easy to blame folks. I don't want to blame folks. I want to take responsibility. If I say that the world needs more poets, then I got to try to be more poetic. This is a challenge of leadership. And by the way, the leaders are not the elected officials. We're all leaders. We all are. And I don't, who gets credit for this? The president gets credit for it. Well, Stokely Carmichael first said, at least one of the people earlier said that we are the leaders we've been looking for. And so I am I getting it right? It was Ella Baker? Stokely got it from her. All right. And I read in your book, one of my favorite things, we who believe in freedom shall not rest. So my point is, calling Ella Baker out, we've got work to do. We're resting right now. We're getting caught up in what I call a state of sedentary agitation. I pull that out when I want to sound like Cornel West. And it would flatter me if he would use that one day in his speech. As Brother Booker said, we can't get caught in a state of sedentary agitation. Come on, man, do it once. Do it. So let's not get so upset, but not get off our backsides and do something about it, all right? Where are we going?
So, that is a great resting point. I'm so sorry, though, to have to end the Q&A. The store should have closed at 8. We're going to keep it open till 9. I am so thrilled that you were here. We would love to have you back if you write a book, you don't write a book. For now, if you want to line up to get a book signed, if you can just stay there, I'll get you.
I'll stay here, yeah. I think you can come back and have a debate over American exceptionalism.